"I can't breathe." I've heard that phrase used several times over the past 20 years. It's just never been recorded in the UK. The image of the police in Britain to most people internationally is the Bobby on the beat, somebody very friendly who shows tourists around. Of course, the harsh reality for a lot of people, particularly black people and working class people, is that the police are not that friendly. If you look at the last case of George Floyd, there are many similar cases we've had in the UK. Some are due to negligence, some are due to direct violence, but they all are people who have died whilst in police custody.
Well, the reason behind this demonstration is to get justice for Ibrahim Assi, who was killed by the police last week.
Despite the fact that the police are not armed generally in the UK, many of the deaths people suffer through violence, through neck holds, choke holds, kneeling on the neck, and many other forms of punishment that lead to death. I can start in the mid-90s with the case of Joy Gardner. She was a Jamaican woman. The police went into her house because they wanted to deport her. They suffocated her using 13 feet of surgical tape over her mouth because she was screaming for help. That was a very, very big case. And since then, we've had the cases of Brian Douglas. We've had Mark Duggan more recently, and some people may be aware of that because that led to some uprisings. Frank Aburu and Paul Coker are just two names of people who use the same words as George had used, "I can't breathe." The reason people are in the streets is because they recognize the parallel experience between the UK and the US. In the UK context, we have policing by consent, which means that we have a very small number of police officers to police a very large number of people. In the London context, there are only 30,000 police officers, and we have 7 million people. And so that's a lot of trust and a lot of consent.
We are a police service that does not use force lightly. We are an organisation that has to use reasonable force at times. We are a police service that takes people's liberty. But unlike the vast majority of services around the world, we are not armed, which means we can't police by force alone and conflict. We police by dialogue.
From the government's point of view, their argument is that we can't really raise these issues of police violence because then there could be a fracture between the trust of the general community and the police. We would argue against that. We know that most people are completely aware that there are very good police officers who serve the public interest, but then there are some who don't, and there has to be a separation of those two groups of people. The families of the people who have been killed over the past 10, 15, 20 years are still fighting for justice. There have been some prosecutions, but none of those have been successful. So fundamentally, no police officer in the UK has ever been convicted for a death in custody. And even in America, that has happened. I am really optimistic in terms of the young generation who are really, really taking on this issue in a way which I've never seen before. There's a ground feeling amongst young people in this country that they won't tolerate racism anymore, they won't tolerate police brutality anymore, and they won't tolerate those things together.